There's a lot of good staff here, but they never ask what I need here. Or whether or not I thought about what I needed before I actually told them what I wanted. As opposed to many workshops that you go to where you sit through a portfolio of hour-and-a-half sessions, because all useful information generally can be condensed into a 90-minute session, punctuated by a 30-minute break, I come for 15 minutes, punctuated by a year intersession. So this is the third time I'm here. It is actually a continuing saga. I actually went through my BIF 5 speech and my BIF 6 speech. Since those are all available online, would add no new content to you whatsoever. They're all available for you to look at. I will assume at some point in the process you go through all of those activities and you'll pick up where BIF 7 leaves off. So here we are in BIF 7. And what I want to talk to you about today is threefold. I want to talk to you about a project, but I want to talk to you about a project in the context of institutional strategy and how it gets developed. Last year, after I did the presentation and talked essentially about what it was we were doing at Babson, for those of you that remember, we're in the business of entrepreneurship. I would be remiss if I didn't say that we were the #1 school for entrepreneurship at the undergraduate level now for the 15th year in a row, and at the graduate level for the 18th year in a row. And so we're beginning to get some sense that there might be an opportunity for us in this space. And I came before the community, now having been president of the school for 2 years, to finally give one of these obligatory state of the school speeches. And in the state of the school speech, I was going to unveil in a very scholarly way the institutional strategy, how it had been developed, our strengths, our weaknesses, our opportunities, our threats, our sources of competitive advantage, and all of the economic underpinnings and capabilities that would generate the opportunities going forward. Not exactly what you'd call particularly interesting, but I had people sitting there, lunch was scheduled for an hour, and I was going to talk for the entire time. The night before that speech, I had a bolt of lightning that came from the download of a blog, www.gapingvoid.com. I don't know how many of you know Hugh MacLeod. Hugh MacLeod is essentially an entrepreneurial artist. Draws most of his art on the back of business cards, and sends out a daily dose of generally smart-ass comments that are linked to kind of entrepreneurs and how delusional they are and what they're trying to do. So the night before this speech, I get a cartoon that essentially says, don't try to be the best at what you do when you can be the only. Don't try to be the best at what you do when you can be the only. This source of strategic wisdom is attributed to Jerry Garcia in an interview he gave about the phenomena of the Grateful Dead, about how they actually manifested themselves to be such an extraordinary phenomenon in the world. And he said, well, it's certainly not our voices, and it's certainly not our lyrics, and it's certainly not our musical skills. We're not actually the best at anything other than we're the only band that seriously pays attention to our fans in ways that no other institution does. So here we are at Babson to come in the next day and said, I know I had 75 slides, but let me just condense it to one. Here's the strategy. We're going to be the only school that does what we do. And what do? Essentially, we're in the business of stimulating the creation of entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs, as you know, are destined to make and find opportunities to create economic and social value everywhere. Okay? Not just in Wellesley, Massachusetts, which obviously is a hotbed of economic and social value for those of you who have been there. But we have 2,000 undergraduates on the campus, 1,300 graduate students, a robust set of executive education enterprises, and the opportunities to influence countless number of people who happen to pass through Wellesley. But what about the rest of the world? Because one of the things you hear this morning as you listen to the themes that emerge from each of the storytellers is a very explicit link to entrepreneurship, at least as I would define it. An encouragement of people to systematically engage in behavior in support of things that they desire. Okay? And in fact, if you explicitly recognize that entrepreneurship was nothing more than providing people with a methodology and approach to act in support of their desires, then the opportunity exists not only to run a wonderful institution, okay, but also to have a much more powerful impact on the world than most small tuition-dependent colleges would ever aspire to have. Now, all that requires us to do is not only articulate the method and diffuse the method, and educate about the method, all of the natural constituencies that we can touch in the process of being able to engage in the broader diffusion of this activity. But it also requires us, because we are an academic institution, at some point in the process, some smart-ass academic is going to say, can you prove it? Right? Now, so far, we've gotten pretty far without having to answer that question. Okay? Just by dint of enthusiasm and personality. And we, in fact, have asserted the 3 dimensions of the strategy of being the only school that does what we do is very simple. 1 is we own a method, entrepreneurial thought and action. I talked about that 2 years ago. 2 is we broaden the context to entrepreneurship of all kinds, okay? That everybody has the capacity to engage in entrepreneurial activity regardless of where they are and regardless of what they do. And 3, we're going to use the method and the broadened definition to be able to impact the world. So what we're saying today is pretty simple. The world needs a broader base and new definitions of entrepreneurship. And our partnership with Business Innovation Factory now is organized to actually begin the process systematically of building the proof statement, okay, by turning a series of gigs and a series of happenstance activities into a documented set of experiences that allows us all to engage in a deeper understanding of entrepreneurship, the method, and also to test the hypothesis about whether, in fact, it does apply to this broadened population of folks, no matter who they are, no matter what they do. Now, in order to be able to set up the academic logic embedded in what I'm talking about this morning, I went back. I got my degree in 1978, okay? Actually, one of the marvelous things is Jim talked about the process of asking me to work with him and my suggesting that we actually go off and do the research on Willow Creek while I was a professor at the Harvard Business School. And people say, well, why did you do that? My answer, very simply, in this world where everybody's kind of beating on academics for all sorts of purposes, is I had tenure and I could do whatever I wanted. Okay? And it turned out that whatever I wanted actually led to a profound set of insights, okay, that actually leads to the institution of Babson playing much off the play sheet of the Willow Creek Association and thinking about how we build methodologies to broadly diffuse what it is we do. But the point at this point is to really understand at a much greater level of detail what it is the experience of the entrepreneurs are, how to digest it, and how to take it forward. I was looking at a number of TED speeches by Henry Mintzberg, who's one of the people I'm going to give a lot of credit to in the context of this talk. And just a few months ago, he gave a TEDx for McGill, where he identified, for those of us who went to school in the 60s, probably the greatest social scientist in planned organizational change, Saul Alinsky, who actually sets the context for what we're talking about here. If you're young enough to actually not know who Saul Alinsky is, find an old person at the break. Most people do not accumulate a body of experience. Most people go through life undergoing a series of happenings which pass through their systems undigested. Happenings become experiences when they are digested, when they are reflected on, related to general patterns, and synthesized. That's what we're in the business of doing. We're in the business of shifting from the documentation of a set of happenings into a deeper understanding of entrepreneurship, okay, the experience, not only to understand its implications for method, but obviously, assertively, to be in the business of being able to spread it as broadly as we physically can. To that extent, we're deeply indebted to the work of organizational behavior theorists in the 60s and 70s. I stopped reading when I got my degree. Rosemary Stewart, who wrote Managers and Their Jobs in 1967, Henry Mintzberg, who did The Nature of Managerial Work in 1973, John Cotter with Mayors in Action, and the general managers, all of whom used the same rigorous observational and chronicling methodology to understand and categorize what many people considered to be unorganized behavior. So unorganized that when we wrote textbooks, if you asked a manager what they did, you know what they said: I plan, organize, direct, and control. Now, that was particularly useful. Okay, that's what they learned in school they did. The fact that it had no relationship to what they did seemed to be a relative irrelevancy because they got a good grade in the course. 2 years ago, I began to introduce the work of Sarah Sarasvathy down at the University of Virginia, who began to talk more systematically about how managers actually thought and recognized the same kind of gap as we found between plan, organize, direct, and control and managerial behavior in the entrepreneurship space. And so what we're trying to do is say, given the discontinuity in thought and given what we learned from the managerial behavior research, is there an opportunity now with new technology to engage in systematic observation and documentation of the entrepreneurial experience in ways that can really add to our learning? So with our colleagues at BIF, here at Babson, we put 250 entrepreneurs at the center of our attention. And we had two agendas, obviously, to learn, and Saul's major agenda here was to create a real-world laboratory also where, as we developed our understanding, we could actually begin to intervene to test new solutions and to actually document results. But one thing that brought BIF and Babson together was an explicit desire to start new conversations and to create new definitions around entrepreneurship. And by the way, not because it's peachy keen, but quite honestly because we believe the power of entrepreneurship, and I've said it here before, it's the most powerful force for economic and social value creation we have. We believe having some mastery of the method, having some understanding of the context, it is not only our opportunity, but quite honestly, our moral responsibility to continue to innovate and create new programs to support entrepreneurs. To support entrepreneurs, 6 to 10-year-old entrepreneurs on the streets of Boston last year, where we did 700 lemonade stands, and next year we'll do 5,000. To support high school students through NIFTY who were relying on entrepreneurship as their lifeline to actually stay in school. To take urban distressed community entrepreneurs through the Goldman Sachs initiative, where we're actually trying to help urban entrepreneurs actually build growth enterprises, create jobs in their communities. To work with folks who are actually looking at entrepreneurship as a fundamental lifeline for avoiding recidivism as people get out of prison. To look at entrepreneurship as a fundamental tool in economies in the world where the educational system is severely underdeveloped and job opportunities severely lacking, recognizing full well that the absence of an education and the absence of a job leads to people adding drama to their lives in ways that are strikingly unproductive for most of us, given the way we define things. To create hope, as we heard in the last presentation. To make people's lives better, okay? That's what we are in the business of doing at Babson College, and that's why we're partnering with BIF to do this work. So it's an R&D lab, but it is also a desire, once we work through the American database, to work with our partners in the Global Consortia for Entrepreneurship Education to actually globalize and have the largest database of video-based assets on the entrepreneurial experience of entrepreneurs of all kinds everywhere. So what are we doing? We looked at how people actually experience it. We molded our approach to actually that of a designer. We used a human-centered design process, all of the buzzwords and logics that you would find here, but we include the very people that we're designing for. We walked in the shoes of entrepreneurs, we listened to their stories, and more importantly, we linked their stories to their behavior, because technology allows us to now intervene to understand the behavioral aspects of people's work without actually having to physically observe them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We had a core method of ethnographic methods that ensured significant exposure to people, to place, and the things that absolutely make up the entrepreneur's experience. Oh, okay, so what have we found? Well, I could tell you, come back next year when I'll have 15 minutes to be able to tell you. But it turns out we have identified in this first round of the 250 essentially largely startup-oriented entrepreneurs, 10 elements of the entrepreneurial experience. Many of them we expected. Validation of things that we've been talking about and writing about in the literature for years. Some we didn't. And we're going to encourage you coming out of this to actually take a look and learn about how entrepreneurs de-educate themselves in order to practice entrepreneurship. So nothing like a college president giving a lecture on de-education. How social cliques limit others' access to entrepreneurship. Obviously, not only the importance of place, but the importance of social networks and cliques. How the most powerful social networks are local and physical, and at least to this point, not virtual. I mean no offense to those of you that believe that simultaneously strong ties can be built in virtual communities, but we can't find it. How failure can be reframed as intentional iteration. It's a much better selling tool. Right? Intentional iteration. That actually sounds sophisticated. And most importantly, how entrepreneurship is becoming a life skill. And that's what leads to the next phase of our work. It's not an occupation, it's a way of life. So where we're going from this is we're going to actually build a story of new reality for what entrepreneurship is and can be. We've started with 250 new venture entrepreneurs. We're now going to look at a much broader sample of entrepreneurs of all kinds and tell the spirit of entrepreneurship from all walks of life. The question we're asking are the methods that are used by a political campaign creator or a filmmaker or a musician, an entrepreneur, or an activist. Are they similar in any way? And if so, how? Can we distill those common experiences in ways that will benefit all entrepreneurs? This is the challenge that we've set for ourselves. Entrepreneurs create and shape our worlds. They generate, as I said, economic and social value in ways that are absolutely an imperative. This is not a word that should be reserved for new business owners. That is just a shocking bastardization of the term and severely devalues the impact that we can have as entrepreneurs. It is a powerful word that when practiced, each and every one of us, whether we're dealing with suffering, dealing with community, dealing with education, dealing with the church, it is a tool to change the world. We're going to keep telling the stories of entrepreneurs because we need more entrepreneurs of all kinds. That's just pure and simple. And we would like you to engage with us by visiting www.businessinnovationfactory.com/elab. That's www.businessinnovationfactory.com/elab. Join us. Immerse yourself in the data. See what you agree and disagree with. Give us your voice, participate in the process, and most importantly, raise your hand as individuals who'd like to get involved in the next phase of this research. Hopefully, I'll have the opportunity to be back here next year to talk about the BIF 8 scenario and what we're learning from a much broader universe of entrepreneurs. But we are just delighted to have the opportunity to engage both with BIF and with Saul and his team to help make the voices of entrepreneurs a much more powerful research base to influence both practice, diffusion, and improvement. Thanks so much.